But then everything changed when the Mongols attacked.
We are due for another Mongol invasion of some kind.
Whatever you are smoking, you should probably stop.
I called it. I wonder if he's ever been to a carnival.
Russia doesn't exist yet.
Okay, this is giving me Vietnam flashbacks.
What?
Let him cook.
Wait, no.
Let him cook.
Actually from the 1600s.
Yes, let him cook.
You're actually fairly due for a major eruption in Mount Vesuvius.
Most people just aren't schizophrenic. Wheels. Hey, the Renaissance was not about reinventing things from the past. It was just about reinventing things from the past.
No, I know. Where's the mud coming from?
Exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, and other things, welcome back to History Unhinged. We are doing sort of a kind of a part 2 deal here, but not totally, because this could be its own standalone video, because what we're covering today is so absurdly incoherent. I recently today, I decided I was going to expose Steven here to Tartaria. Now, on the Lore Lodge, that's where you'll find the first half of this, which honestly can be watched completely independently, and you don't need to watch that to watch this. Though, as
for anyone who has not joined in or who did not see that episode, here you're going to need to briefly explain. I will in a moment.
I will in a moment. My point, because that's where we're starting. But my point in saying this is, you don't have to watch the Lore Lodge one. However, as somebody who makes money from it, I would prefer you did. Also, he's here. It's basically just a History Unhinged episode.
It's the exact same format with the here in comparison to what they usually do.
Yeah, there also, by this point, by the time this is coming out, there is a compilation video of our 2 videos covering Tartaria in its entirety. So you're welcome to watch those as well if you want to. But we watched the first half of Mind Unveiled's Tartaria video. The one where he's trying to explain to Charlie from Critical what Tartaria is. And he spends the first half hour of it basically just flashing a bunch of images in front of you and saying things.
I'm not kidding when I even say this here in the first place, that over 70% of the images appear to just be screenshots of Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Like not even the full images, like of paragraphs on Wikipedia.
And almost none of them are directly addressed.
Almost none of them are directly related to the thing that he's talking about.
It's incredible.
A lot of them aren't even indirectly related. Like the images of the Holy Roman Empire when talking about stuff, it doesn't make any sense.
But it will when we watch the next half. So we'll begin here by, we kind of ended the last video around this spot, but just in case you didn't see it, let's allow our buddy Mind Unused to define Tartaria for you.
It seems that the best way to approach this was just to jump into it, because many have not even considered that American cities could have been hijacked cities, so I wanted to focus more on that rather than getting into the semantics on what exactly is Tartaria.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. He's not actually going to explain it. Anyway, moving swiftly along into American cities are stolen.
I was going to say, but is he going to elaborate on hijacked cities at all?
He is actually going to do that, but I want to be clear. This is not like we're living on stolen land. This is not a land acknowledgement. This is so much worse. And I say worse because I did see right before we got here a video of a Canadian police official doing a press conference about 2 missing children. I want to be clear. These children are white. It's in Nova Scotia. The press conference does not start with, hello, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about what we know about these 2 missing children. The press conference starts with a land acknowledgement about the Mi'kmaq, and then proceeds to be about how African Nova Scotians have been important to their culture, which I'm not denying that either of these things are true. This was Mi'kmaq land at one point, and I'm sure that African Canadians in Nova Scotia have contributed to society in a number of important ways. Just the timing of it seems odd, especially when the RCMP has an absolutely abysmal record of finding missing people. No matter what their race. It's actually a lot worse if they're Native American, though. Anyway, that's, I don't know how we got to that subject. But
I was wondering that.
You were talking about the whole thing with how this whole sncenario with Tartaria is
land acknowledgement. It's not a land acknowledgement, but I can't pass up an opportunity to attack the RCMP.
Yeah, it's valid.
Because they're just horrible at their jobs. So, moving swiftly along, here's Mind Unveiled, who apparently is actually 2 people. There's a man and a woman involved in this channel. Yeah. There's at least 2 people who are running this. I don't know why, but let's allow it to play.
But now, I can explain that in more detail, which should answer many of your questions of exactly what we're discussing. Okay, so we begin a detailed explanation by moving to terms. Our definition of Tartaria may differ from other researchers' definition of the term.
Not particularly helpful.
So we need to first establish what are we talking about, because Charlie kept saying, oh, what are the Tartarians? Are they reptilians or underground apartment dwellers? Well, let's give the shortest definition possible. Tartaria is really just lost old world history. That's it. Obviously, there's more to it than just that.
That's it, guys. That's it.
That's it.
It's just
That's
lost
it.
old world
That's
history.
very clearly, that's all. Yeah.
But there's more to it.
Because it's also not just lost history. It's the whole premise is that it's a giant conspiracy where an entire empire was wiped out of the history books.
And you must understand
and is responsible for everything of the modern day and age.
You must understand the people who wiped this out are the Jewish Catholic Freemasons.
And the Jesuits.
And the Jesuits.
As well as the Irish Phoenicians, right?
And these are...
No, the Phoenician Phoenicians.
We're getting there. But yeah, I mean, as we know, the Jews, the Freemasons, the Catholics, and the Jesuits are groups that famously all get along.
What is history? Can history be faked or tampered with? Many are willing to accept that the mainstream media can lie in the modern day. People still have issues trusting authority in recent times, but why is that same logic not applied to the history books? Let me just give you
We did cover this in the first part. It does. That's our entire job.
Let me just give you a couple things to consider before we give a definition. For example, with the World's Fairs. Now hold on. The story that we're given is that these architectures seen in these photos of the World's Fair in America during the early 1900s were all just built in a short 2 to 3 year span with no construction photos, and that they were all built from wooden pallets. Now really think about that for a second. Look at the Chicago's World's Fair. You see these embankments? And notice the level of detail on this architecture? Even if this was just wood, this would have been a massive feat. Yet,
I gotta say this.
We did cover this in part 1. I wanted to go back a little bit so we had some crossover just in case.
I did an entire podcast episode for my thing for the history of everything. I did it on the Chicago World Fair because genuinely this thing was super impressive. Did you know that it's actually at this event that brownies were first unveiled?
Really?
Yeah, brownies. Like what we think of for like the actual like fudgy brownies that came into existence for the Chicago World Fair.
That's wild.
Thing. Yeah.
What was that? Was there like a specific reason?
There was just, this is a thing where they showed off food, they showed off culture, they showed off everything. And so you would just make things that were specifically designed for it. This is where the Ferris wheel got really big.
Yeah, it didn't really occur to me that there was a time before brownies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So brownies were a thing at this fair. They had a Ferris wheel, which was a huge deal because people weren't used to being able to go higher up into things because most buildings were not, 5, 6, 7 stories tall. So the majority of people, unless you climbed a cliff or something, you didn't really get to see things. It was genuinely impressive.
So you're saying it was quite an affair?
It was quite an affair. A Chicago World
Affair. An affair of the fair for the World's Fair.
Yes.
all we get for a historic record of the construction is some shoddy footage that actually comes from a movie about the World's Fair. And that's it.
Shoddy footage. It literally shows images of it. It's not even footage at that point.
Yeah.
It's literally showing images of the construction.
Yep. Which, of course, I love how it doesn't occur to him that the pictures in the films could be from the construction.
So also, we need, for anyone who's not watching this here, we need to clarify this for what exactly is being said and why we're reacting to this. If you haven't seen the first part, definitely go back to that. But what he is saying is that the Chicago World Fair, the buildings for it that were basically shells, they had very fancy looking outsides, but were pretty much just hollow on the inside, that they were designed in order to look very pretty, but not actually serve as a long-term functional purpose. They were always meant to be taken down. He's saying that those buildings were destroyed, but that they had already existed prior to the fair.
Oh yeah, they were already there.
Built by a long-lost civilization that was then covered up by those that came after.
Keep in mind, the reality of the situation is that these buildings were essentially built as set pieces.
Yeah, they were. In the same
they're
way
like
that you
film
have for
sets.
like Universal Studios. This is basically Universal Studios Chicago.
Yeah, they were not meant to be permanent structures. They were not meant, it's like building a diorama just on a large scale. It does not take that much effort when you've got teams of hundreds of people working on each building.
And then only like 1 or 2 of the buildings were ever meant to be permanent. That's it.
Yeah, and it's funny, like the one that he does in fact show is the one that was not built to be temporary.
Yeah, doesn't look temporary to me. No, because it's not supposed to be.
That's
That is
a real
literally not supposed to be.
And that's it. There wasn't just one World's Fair either, but several in the United States during the 1900s. So they just built these massive World's Fairs just to tear them down a couple years later.
Yes.
Many cities had these.
I wonder if he's ever been to a carnival.
It would seem not. It would
a
seem
traveling carnival?
It would seem this individual has not been many places.
No. That's one of those things that I covered. It's like, this is also talking about things within the United States, not even addressing any of the history or reason behind why something would look the way that it did
that's
in Europe.
that's the other amazing thing. He focuses entirely on the United States and Canada.
But the entire premise of Tartaria is that it was supposed to have originated out of the steppes.
Yep. And moved east, I guess.
In Louisville, Kentucky, and Nashville, Tennessee. I mean, really look how massive some of these things are. They are entire cities. And so, this brings up several questions. Were these buildings truly built the way that we've been taught, or were they already here? If you type in Tartaria, the basic gist of what they'll tell you is that Tartaria...
I think this was the origin of Occam's shaving kit.
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
What is Occam's shaving kit?
Well, for when a razor just isn't enough.
Occam's razor.
Yeah.
Wait, I'm drawing a blank.
The simplest explanation is most likely the correct one.
Oh, that's...
Yeah. But in this case, the razor's not enough. He needs the whole shaving kit.
is that Tartaria was a global lost civilization with advanced technology that appeared on old maps and was erased from history.
Literally,
that's
Europe.
definitely more
Literally,
likely.
Europe. This is
Yeah.
what he brings up, and the idea of Grand Tartary. Now, do you know what one of the most common names for the Mongols were in history? The Tartars. That is how they
Comes
were
from
referred
a Persian word too.
Yeah. And so that is what many different groups referred to them as, even though it wasn't accurate. The Tartars were actually it refers to a very specific group, but they're one of the groups that ended up becoming pretty much a subsidiary of the Mongols.
Oh, that's the thing too, is like he'll bring up a whole bunch of stuff, but in 1270 you get French writings that refer to the Tartars, and contextually it's very obvious they're talking about the Mongol Empire. Like, you don't even need to be a historian to read it and be like, oh, they're talking about the Mongols.
What was the reason? So who were like the original Tartars, and what was the reason why the Mongols were then referred to as the Tartars?
It's really hard to say. Okay, so here's one of the things that happened.
Basically, they didn't know much about anything east of what is modern-day Western Russia.
So one of the big things that happened in the case
Keep in mind,
of
Marco
Russia,
Polo was when?
Marco Polo ended up happening in the
1200s.
1200s, yes, because this is by the time of Kublai Khan.
Yeah.
Here. So what ends up going, because Genghis Khan is 1175, if I recall correctly. The big thing, right, is that Russia doesn't exist yet. It's Kievan Rus, and you have all these varying different principalities, and Russia as a concept does not really exist yet. But the idea behind the varying different princes that are there is like, oh, the only real threat that we have is from kind of south and west. We don't have to worry about anything across the east because that's literally just Siberia. And no one is going to come from Siberia and attack us.
It's cold.
But then everything changed when the Mongols attacked.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that the Mongols, as they move, they do this very ingenious thing of incorporating every single tribe that they come across of, yeah, you're going to fight with us now. And if you don't, we're going to slaughter all of you.
Was that an intentional Avatar: The Last
Yes,
Airbender
yes, that
reference?
was.
Okay, just making sure.
Also, my favorite thing about this is that this is not even the first time that happened in history. This is the second time that a horde of mounted archers swept west out of the eastern steppe, incorporated every tribe they came across, or killed them, or drove the ones ahead of them further west into Europe, and then managed to make it to, like, Poland before encountering any real resistance.
So really, the biggest lesson from history is never ignore the steppe.
No, pretty much.
Yeah. Also,
Because
it's where Europeans came from in the first place.
600 years prior to this, it was the Huns.
Yeah. Really, we're actually due at this point.
Yeah.
You did say this like
kind
a
of,
month
yeah.
or two ago.
We are due for another Mongol invasion of some kind.
Maybe some tribe out of Pakistan. Could be.
I think India's got that handled.
India
at the
and
moment.
Pakistan. We'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see what
Well,
happens.
but by the time this comes out, we'll certainly know what's going on with India and
Which
Pakistan.
also, I will say this right now for anyone who is watching this, I called it. I called it. I called it. No one really knows what it is that I'm talking about, but in one of the previous episodes, we were talking about potential conflicts that would break out across the world, which I actually think we saved that for a patron part.
We might have.
I think,
I think that's in the Patreon.
Yeah.
I specifically said that one of the most likely conflicts is India, Pakistan, Pakistan, China. And I have talked about this for months. Lo and behold, I am once again right. Now, thankfully, I didn't make a video on this subject here because otherwise people would have accused me of causing another world
You did
conflict.
make a video on the subject. It just didn't come out yet.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I mean, it has now.
Yeah, at the time this now goes out.
We're living in days of future past.
Yes.
Yeah.
As Charlie mentioned, a lot of the main points seem to be old maps, and yes, this may not be conclusive, especially with the maps that just
It
say
may
Tartary
not
on
be
it,
conclusive.
But I do
Oh,
think
yeah,
the
may
map
not.
of 1340
May
depicting
not.
castles in America, regardless if it's crown or not, is quite suspicious regarding
He's
the
just
history
asking
that it tells to the
questions,
founding
guys.
of America. Also, Charlie kept equating Tartaria to Atlantis, which is fair, but to make the distinction clear,
Also, just I want to see this guy on Joe Rogan because even Joe Rogan's going to call him a moron. Joe Rogan's going to be like, you shouldn't do DMT.
Whatever you are smoking, you should probably stop.
Exactly.
The idea of Tartaria is from a much more recent time, meaning when people are talking about Tartaria, they're actually talking about the 1500s to 1700s period, where a civilization that existed in a far more recent time.
Which is so funny because we have documents labeling Tartaria dating back to the 1200s.
And the concept here of what they call Tartaria was basically just the east to Siberia. And that was the term for the region. Because here's the thing, and I already talked about this if you, again, haven't seen the previous one. What happens is that the last of the, what we would call Tartars, they weren't actually Tartars, but they were referred to as, was the Golden Horde, which was one of the successor states to the Mongol Empire when it broke apart into multiple different khanates. You had the Golden Horde, you had what would be Timur the Great, and like Transoxiana, you had like Afghanistan, you had Uzbekistan, you had Oirat, you had all these different groups that are their own khanates that technically...
And you had the Mughals.
Yes,
down in
the
India.
Mughals. Well, because the Mughals, they were then the descendants of Timur.
Yeah.
Like that's where that originates from. And then you have, of course, the Sultan of Delhi that gets completely crushed with them.
It's all so tiresome.
was left out from the history books, specifically because it was hijacked.
No!
Where's the evidence?
Wait,
Where's the
let him
source?
talk. Let him cook.
Well, now we're getting into alternative history and false timelines. Let's start with the evidence on how the whole story of Pompeii is a complete fabrication. There are a number of glaring inconsistencies in the academic...
This is where we stopped.
Yeah, Pompeii.
Is Pompeii.
We had to, because at that point, it was like, what, an hour and 45 minutes?
Yeah, it was going long. So Pompeii is fake. You know, okay, this is giving me Vietnam flashbacks to Mom Millennial.
Glaring inconsistencies in the academically approved narrative of the city's destruction, and many arguments that support that Pompeii is actually from the 1600s and not 2,000 years ago.
What?
Let him cook.
Wait, no.
Let him cook.
Actually from the 1600s.
Yes, let him cook.
Some inconsistencies include the frescoes that were discovered there and dated to 79 AD actually resemble the techniques used by medieval painters, including the famous painting of the Three Graces, found in the House of the Three Graces.
You mean during the Renaissance when they were trying to bring things back?
Hey, the Renaissance was not about reinventing things from the past. It was just about reinventing things from the past.
Do you know what one of the primary drivers behind the Renaissance in other areas across Italy
I don't think anybody was driving yet.
What was it?
When the Ottomans ended up conquering the last-ditch pieces of Constantinople and the Byzantines, you had varying different Greek scholars, engineers, and more that in the years prior to it being conquered and with the fall of Constantinople had fled, and you got Byzantine refugees in different parts of the world that actually kickstarted parts of the Renaissance was already kind of going, and then they come in and bringing in all of these scrolls, books, and everything else from the old libraries.
Lions and tigers and bears, oh my.
That help kick things off in other parts of the region, which really, that is the point that we start to see the Renaissance just go.
Mm-hmm. It's great. I love this. Also, Assassin's Creed told me he's wrong. So
Ubisoft somehow does better history than...
Ubisoft is more accurate.
Crazy.
House of the Three Graces in Pompeii. Furthermore, Vesuvius can be seen on 16th century maps, showing that the volcano was active long after the traditional date of their eruption, and Pompeii was...
Because as we all know, guys, volcanoes can only erupt once.
And people are not going to think that it ever possibly was going to again. Surely not. They're not going to depict it like that to let people know, hey, this is a volcano.
Yeah.
And people also don't re-inhabit the areas even though they are volcanically active.
eruption, and Pompeii was not in fact lost. There's a 1631 memorial plaque on the road to Naples that lists Pompeii and Herculaneum as the victims of the 1631 eruption of Vesuvius. There were surgical tools in Pompeii that were not supposed to exist during that time, yet they were found in Pompeii and are dated to 2000.
Wait, hold on. Is his argument in this, and I'm reading this now, Roman surgical instruments were strikingly similar to modern ones and used for many of the same purposes. Steel or bronze scalpels to make incisions, blunt hooks as probes for dissection, sharp hooks to lift pieces of tissue, forceps to extract small pieces of bone, and bone saws for the heavy work of performing, and then it cuts off from there. But I need to specify this here right now. Do you think that someone is just going to invent a completely different shaped kind of thing when the Romans were at arguably one of the forefronts of medical technology? Do you know why they were so good at stitching people back together? Because they were fighting constantly and had a state machine to pay for those troops, and you want to keep your troops as healthy as you can, which is why you actually utilize. In fact, it's one of the big things. Rome loses a lot of its medical technology. Do you know when? Justinian's plague.
That makes sense.
That's one of the things. So you see a whole area of technology and knowledge wiped out from Rome because some of the most learned, trained, skilled people in society die trying to take care of others.
Yeah. I'm 90% sure that when I went ahead and did this originally, I was able to explain this. I just am going to need to find it really quick.
I'm going to imagine that there was a 1631 eruption of Pompeii. I'm
going to look this up right now. I just got to verify
coordination
this.
or not coordination.
This could have been a small one.
Yeah.
1631 Pompeii.
I'll just intro and brief.
Yeah, the 1631 eruption of Mount Vesuvius, one of many eruptions of Mount Vesuvius, a major stratovolcano in southern Italy. Its eruption in 1631 is the most destructive episode in the recent history and one of the deadliest of all time, as it killed 4,000 people. Yeah. Before it became active again in 1631, Vesuvius had remained for about 5 centuries in a state of quiescence, with the last significant eruption being 1169.
Yep.
Meaning, forget ancient Rome, there was multiple before that.
I'm trying to remember if there was a segment in here where I feel like I covered this and I was like, wait a second, no, this is not.
So like the image of like what looked as either the Pope or a cardinal, perhaps like looking over from the clouds over Mount Vesuvius, you wouldn't think that would have been happening in perhaps the 12th century?
Yeah, I mean, when was Pompeii eventually abandoned? That's the question.
Oh no, the area around it was continuously inhabited.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Afterwards.
Like,
you also have to understand, volcanic soil is stupidly rich. It is amazing for farming. And so people are going to keep on going back to the kind of area.
Here we go, Pompeii.
Of course, the soil itself is going to be very different, and it's going to be in different parts. Prior to the eruption, Mount Vesuvius was lush with dense vegetation. The lower slopes were lined with vineyards and orchards, while higher elevations housed groups of oak and chestnut trees. Yet literally, because again, the soil is so freaking rich. That's the point.
Yeah, there was something about this inscription, and I can't remember what it was.
Also, I'm saying this here right now. Other factors also play into the expectation for an eruption. Historically, Vesuvius has erupted on a large scale every 300 to 400 years, which means we are actually fairly due for a major eruption at Mount Vesuvius.
Wow.
We are. We actually are. With the last one occurring here, 300 to 400 years, that's now. That is like anywhere within the next 50 years, there could be another major eruption.
That's nuts. I wonder what will happen first, that or Yellowstone.
Oof. God.
Could you imagine if it happened at the same time?
What if it did every single major volcano going off at the same time? That's exactly what we need. Yeah, in 2025, I think that yeah. That would be just par for the course. Like December 31st, 2025, and then just all volcanoes at the same time go off.
Yep. It'd be
I hope
hard.
to God I'm not predicting something right now. I swear, if this comes back to bite me,
It
my
would.
wife will murder me long before the ash ever does.
It would be hard to beat the doomsday allegations at that point.
Yeah.
No, I would be eternally cursed.
Okay.
Are you going through the script right now?
No, I'm trying to.
This is actually the longest pause we've ever had for any of these things.
I know.
Yeah.
But it's driving me nuts because I remember there was something that I talked about with this. All right, in case there's a weird aggressive cut, Steven and I were trying to figure out this inscription, which, first of all, makes no sense because in the year 1660 and 17 days before the calends of January is on the inscription, and yet it's labeled as being an inscription from 1631.
And
Also, there's no information about this inscription online anywhere.
No, the big thing again, and this is the eruption, the big eruption referring to. There was an eruption in 1631, but guess what? I think I already said this here, but it shouldn't be cut off here. There was also one in 1169.
Yeah, this mountain erupted multiple times. Also,
Which, on that note, and I said this, and again, it might be included in here, it might not be. Mount Vesuvius, on average, seems to have a big eruption every 300 to 400 years, meaning we are technically speaking due for one, like right now.
Yeah, I guess they're also probably talking about King Philip IV of Spain here? Which, if it were a 1631 eruption, then it being in... Nothing about this timing-wise makes sense. I wish I read Latin so I could actually read what this says.
Because at that point, you had the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs control nations.
No, I know that. I'm not questioning that. I'm questioning why the dating makes no sense. Why is it called a 1631 epitaph if it's talking about something that happened in 1660, but there wasn't an eruption in 1660?
Well, there's also a date down there that's 35. So...
And at the top, the date given is...
Was there a 1660 eruption as well? Like, did they have another one?
I don't know. Nothing about it makes sense. But, I mean, even if we grant him this one, it doesn't change the rest of it.
As the victims of the 1631 eruption of Vesuvius, there were surgical tools in Pompeii that
It did. There was another one in 1660.
Okay, so he just can't decide which year.
No, he's mixing multiple events together. There was one in 1631. There was one in 1660. Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, Mount Vesuvius. Activity thereafter became almost continuous, with relative severe eruptions occurring in 1616, 1682, 1694, 1698, 1707, 1737, 1760, 1767. You get the idea.
Yeah.
There's a lot more.
I would almost guarantee that inscription does not say what he says it says.
Yeah, probably.
I can try and check it in post.
Yet they were found in Pompeii and are dated to 2,000 years ago, yet they resemble medieval surgical tools. Oh yeah, and how could there be
Because
scissors
would be the same kind
Scissors look the same way today that they did 500 years ago. Wheels.
You know the old joke?
Know that if you polish metal like a lot, it becomes reflective like a mirror? Now guess what they had 3,000 years ago?
Mirrors.
Polished
Here
metal.
we go. Ready? It's a pineapple.
How could there be pineapples in their frescoes if the pineapple wasn't introduced into Europe until 1493? Let's keep in mind that
It's a pine cone. That's why.
That didn't look like a pineapple.
In the image, it's a pine cone. It's not a pineapple.
Because if it was a pineapple, pineapples are way bigger. Like
Yeah.
that pineapple was the same size as an apple.
Yeah, it's that's not a pineapple.
Oh yeah, and how could there be pineapples in their frescoes if the pineapple wasn't introduced into Europe until 1493?
What do we got? What's he giving us here as a source? Eyes of Rome. In Pompeii, a fresco discovered in the house of Ephebe illustrates a child making an unusual offering to the gods, the fruit of a pineapple. This has led to numerous theories about the possibility of contact between Native Americans and the ancient Romans.
What is
Yes, 'cause the pineapple-
eyesofrome.com?
The pineapple comes from North America.
Well, if you're counting Hawaii as North America.
I don't think it even counts as North America.
Well, it is part of the United States.
eyesofrome.com. It's a blog.
Is it going to have the all-seeing eye on their homepage?
Hang on.
Because I feel like it's going to.
I gotta go to it.
Fresco showing a pineapple.
Is it actually just eyesofrome.com? Like, that's straight up not popping up with anything. Hold on.
That's the only thing I can find with this.
BTS.
Yeah, it's
It's a tour group.
oh my god.
Eyes of Rome is a tour group.
Probably not a very good one.
Your private guides for tailor-made luxury tours in Rome.
Historians have identified it as an umbrella pine cone.
So a blog that is on...
It's a pine cone. I knew it was a pine cone.
Into Europe until 1493. Let's keep in mind that Pompeii was supposedly discovered in
Again,
1748.
screenshots of just straight up fucking...
Oh, yeah.
It looks like
That's Google.
screenshots of Google AI.
Yep. Well,
That's
this
it.
is actually pre-Google AI. This is just Google's automatic results.
Oh my god, that's worse.
Ready? First came to Europe in the 16th century.
Let's keep in mind that Pompeii was supposedly discovered in 1748. Again, we have an entire...
No, the ruined city of ancient Pompeii.
Yes.
Because cities get buried.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, what it was is that there was another town called Pompeii built in the same general area. And there was also a Herculaneum and an Octavianum that were built in the same area that were named after the originals, but were not in the exact same location.
Yeah. Because you had people that were there, but it wasn't the exact same port city or like pleasure city as what you would have had with ancient Rome. But you still had houses there that if you dug down, you would get to the ancient city.
Yeah, so...
We have an entire video breaking this down. The evidence is there. You just have to be willing to look. But okay, let's try to define Tartaria again. Tartaria is a term that became popular around the 2018 to 2020 period before it became quickly filtered by YT's algorithm.
Filtered by what?
YT's algorithm. I think he means
Yeah.
YouTube.
It wasn't filtered. Most people just aren't schizophrenic. Like, it's not filtered. Most people watch it, go, this is stupid, and click away.
Yeah.
Which is what happened the first time I saw it.
Or they think it's really interesting, show a friend, and their friend calls them stupid.
Yeah, this is the thing that people don't get about the algorithm. YouTube isn't hiding your videos from people. YouTube just isn't showing people your videos because you're stupid.
The only reason YouTube ever promotes or doesn't promote content is if they do or don't think people will watch it, because their entire goal is making money off of ad revenue from people watching the videos. If it doesn't do well, it's because it has been deemed unworthy and unwatchable for some reason.
Also, it's very important to note that a ton of people who make these videos on their channel go on to say something absurdly racist.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is sometimes the reason for it not being watchable is due to the content, not just being boring, but maybe it violates TOS.
For example, in this video, he claims Jews aren't real.
Which is probably not very good for people trying to advertise.
Tartaria is basically the next big conspiracy after FE. If you don't know anything about history,
After FE, he says.
What is FE?
What do you think FE is?
Iron?
FE.
Yeah,
Two words.
sorry, I'm thinking of FE in terms of the...
Flat Earth. Oh, here we go. The mud flood cataclysm is a geological event that occurred in the mid-17th to 18th century. That's a long time period for a mud flood to have occurred.
Yeah, because if it's a flood of any actual proportion, the mid-17th century, so let's say 1650s to potentially, even if it's early,
1750s.
even assuming that it's the early 18th century, so it's not a full 100 years, that's like a period of about maybe 50, 60 years.
Hang on, really
He also
quickly.
doesn't understand what soil liquefaction is at all.
No, I know. Where's the mud coming from?
Exactly.
Because if it was, wait, pause real quick. If it was just a flood, yes, precipitation can happen.
We'll get there.
Mud flood insinuates that there was a large landmass above all of
Let
this.
him cook. Let him cook.
I
Okay.
explain it to you. It's a massive rabbit hole that questions all of our official history. The difference is Tartaria is alternative history and FE is alternative cosmology. It gets interesting because Charlie was trying to bunch all the conspiracies under one label, implying that Tartaria is just something people want to believe in. He even said that
You don't think that it is?
Yeah.
Keep watching.
a bunch of nonsense and make it sound believable. I mean, go for it. If there's much more to this than you want to believe, and I don't blame anyone for not wanting to look into it. But claiming it's just made up is ironic since these people demand evidence without
A mud volcano.
Mud
A mud
volcanoes.
volcano. So in order to talk about a global phenomenon in which entire cities all across the world,
And keep in mind,
over
not
the course
a
of 50
single,
years,
not a single civilization recorded this happening.
for even hostile nations that were obviously hostile to one another, that they teamed up together in order to hide it. Yeah, sure. Over a period of, I'm guessing at a minimum, we're talking 50 years, there was so many mud volcanoes that it drowned the world in mud.
Well, no, not the world.
It
Not the world,
drowned a
just America.
significant portion. But
The whole of America. Yep.
people demand evidence without even watching an entire video. Which, like I said, is understandable since they do tend to run long, but without looking into it, it's not very important.
Tend to run long, he says, as he can't make a single concise video that goes under 2 hours aside from this
he
one.
didn't address Tartaria until 29 minutes into the hour-long video.
Impartial to deem it as nonsense. History, once you dive past all the filler, is filled with mistakes, plot holes, and complete fabrications, and it's hard not to notice those inconsistencies and not ask questions, even questions that might seem obvious or stupid.
I love this. He has it on screen. Historians now agree Ybor City's tunnels were built as sewers and not smuggling routes, which is historians doing precisely what he says we don't do. Historians looking at it and being like, I don't like that explanation. I think it's this.
And then digging deeper to try and figure out the truth of it.
Fabrications, and it's hard not to notice those inconsistencies and not ask questions, even questions that might seem obvious or stupid at first. So to finalize the terms, let me give you our definition of Tartaria.
Now, keep in mind, in this video, he said he was going to define Tartaria 5 minutes ago, then gave a whole spiel about unrelated stuff before coming back and finally defining Tartaria.
Tartaria is the phenomena or category of alternative history that delves into the research of lost history and civilizations, hijacks and stolen buildings, magic, alchemy, and cloning, antiquitech, cataclysms, mud floods, buried buildings, star forts and fortified cities, royal bloodlines and secret brotherhoods, asylums, orphans, and oddfellows, underground tunnels and waste management, and suppressed Morse history. By labeling Tartaria as simply a civilization, we're missing out on many aspects of this mission.
Wait, except
Where's the Moorish history
it's
that goes a
coming.
part of this?
It's coming, but here's the thing. He's like, by labeling Tartaria as any one conspiracy, whereas earlier in the video he called it the largest conspiracy without defining what that means, only to come back here and being like, it's not a civilization. Meanwhile, he's been describing it as a civilization the entire time.
Which makes sense.
Here we go.
Because that's just one piece. It's not until you have all the pieces that a bigger picture starts to appear. There is
Empire of Tartars, Tartary, literally referring to the fucking
Well,
steppe
Steven,
nomads.
you need to understand. Steven, you need to understand that they erased it from history except for the few convenient places where they didn't. Because they were able to fabricate millennia of documents, but they forgot to get rid of all the maps.
Hang on. So I just wanted to look into it. One of the articles he had up was about the mud volcano that was spewing, and scientists were still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
So that article that he had up was from 2017.
Yeah.
It was specifically about the Lucy mud volcano in Indonesia, which covers an area that is only 7 square kilometers. Now, granted, there was a lot of mud in that 7 square kilometers, and it was relatively conclusively determined to be a result of oil and gas fracking in the area, making the land unstable beneath it, and thus essentially having a spewing of a mixture of oil and gas, like liquefied like water and all that stuff just spewing out due to the instability of the earth underneath it due to human tampering.
Oh my god, you know what this means?
What?
The United States invented time travel and went back in time to start fracking early so that they could drown the entire world in mud volcanoes.
Yes.
You know what? Time traveling fracking seems like a great story to me.
Did you say oil? Straw!
these subjects, but in order to understand Tartaria, we have to have that base. We're about to go down a rabbit hole of history.
A blanket? Literally, what is a blanket term used in Western European literature and cartography for a vast part of Asia bound by the Caspian Sea, the Ural Mountains, and Pacific Ocean? Literally from the steppes moving all the way into Siberia.
The scary part is he has a whole bunch of sycophants under this video just agreeing with everything he says. It's terrifying.
Taught to us, so yes, that means there are going to be some things that you have to investigate for yourself, meaning there's no official answer.
What do you mean there's no
This is just
official
a summary,
answer?
and I can only say so much on
He's
each
just
subject.
asking questions.
Okay, so let's start off with lost history and civilizations.
Here
So
we
yeah,
go.
Obviously you know about Atlantis, but there are other more recent cultures that were completely wiped and left out from the history books, being instead labeled as
Ready? Ready for this? The Irish connection?
I'm not ready for
Oh
this.
yeah, this is it. This is the big one.
Here we go.
not
This
ready
is
for this.
if you've been waiting for us to get to the meat and potatoes and wondering why it's kind of been a little silly so far, this is where it starts to go nuts.
Yep.
fantasy or mythology. One theory that was not started by us and actually has been discussed by several scholars since the 17th century.
Several
I wanna be
scholars.
very clear.
Started by several scholars.
I want to be very clear. Michael Sarian is not a scholar. He is never published.
Who is he?
He's just a random author. He's the kind of guy they'd cite on Ancient Aliens. Fuck. I looked into a whole bunch of his stuff. Zero credentials, no legitimate research. Just writes stuff, doesn't provide sources, doesn't cite anything, just says things.
He's L. Ron Hubbard writing about
Yeah.
space civilization.
Yeah.
Is the Irish origins of civilization. And yeah, I get it, that might sound funny to people who have never heard it before, but there's actually a shocking amount of evidence to support that.
What do you mean a shocking?
Let him cook.
Listen, I'm gonna say this: if there
go
was
back a
even
little bit.
if there was one piece of evidence, that would be shocking to me.
Let him cook.
I get it, that might sound funny to people who have never heard it before, but there's actually a shocking amount of evidence to support that Gaelic and Irish Christianity is in fact the original church and it was just straight up hijacked by the Roman Catholic Church.
Let him
How do you
cook.
expect me to give
Yep,
you proof
just
of that
wait.
in such a short time? I mean, be reasonable. But it's within the etymology, the allegory.
You have been going on for 34 minutes, my friend.
Oh, and this is the thing. He just keeps on going, and he's like, "Now, don't expect me to give you evidence. That's why you have to watch my 6-hour video on it, in which he just waffles."
I'm saying this right now. My wife would murder this man. And I say that because when we talk about getting to the point, I have been trained to specifically explain every historical thing that I try to explain to her in under 60 seconds, because if I don't, she has the attention span of a goldfish and it's lost.
Yep.
However, in times like this, she would hurt him because there's too much. Nothing has been said, and it has been over half an hour.
Yep. Just keep watching.
But it's within the etymology, the allegorical references of the Bible that were not meant to be taken literally, but allegorically. One of the best books on the subject is called Irish Wisdom Preserved in Bible and Pyramids by Conor McDarry, which covers...
Here's my favorite part.
Irish wisdom preserved in Bible and pyramids.
Now wait, do you remember who Conor McDarry is?
He's a man named John Guerin. He's an American who, as far as I can tell, never stepped foot in Ireland. Did not know Irish, and I've read his book. I purchased this book. I read the book. And then what I did is I went and I checked out every Irish dictionary that exists, every Middle Irish dictionary, every Old Irish dictionary. And you know what I found going through this table of words he gives? Almost every single one is wrong. These words don't mean the things he claims that they mean in at least one language every single time, as he's comparing between Phoenician and Irish. In some cases, the word doesn't exist in either language.
Of the Bible that were not meant to be taken literally, but allegorically. One of the best books on the subject is called Irish Wisdom Preserved in Bible and Pyramids by Conor McDarry, which covers in detail the process of hijacking a civilization. Sometimes this might be confusing to people new to the subject, and a typical response is that some people immediately visualize the modern-day Irish people. For sure, many from Ireland with RH-negative bloodlines are connected to this, but...
So
RH-negative
I
bloodlines.
know.
What is that?
Hold on. Are we getting into aliens?
We can in just a second, but really quickly, I want to read through
Hang on.
this quote.
What is RH negative?
You want to explain it?
Okay, so my wife can actually do a better job on this in case I get anything wrong. But correct me if I'm wrong with this, Gabby. The whole premise of it in the first place is that there is blood that is in humans that only exists because it was deposited there by aliens.
Okay, so we are officially going into alien territory here
Yes,
then.
but RH-negative thing,
Conspiracy.
RH-negative blood is a thing, to be clear.
That's like the whole thing, like theory behind it, right? That's what they say. That's the theory.
That's not what happened, because it's just RH and RH negative. Like, you're RH positive, I'm RH negative.
Correct.
So what?
15% of people are RH-negative.
Yes, and so those 15% are apparently the descendants of those who have been genetically engineered or deposited by aliens.
Yeah.
What?
The rhesus, like,
Here, Gabby,
Gabby,
just come
yeah,
here. You got to
come on
speak it
over.
into the microphone. Come here.
Speak into the microphone, Gabby.
Come here.
What exactly is rhesus?
it's just something we have in our blood.
What does it do?
Rhesus, it's the name.
It just exists?
Yeah, like, some
Okay.
people have it, some people don't.
Interesting, okay.
It suggests that there was a genetic bottleneck at some point, basically, in one population.
The thing is, though, I did have, you can explain.
I think it's common amongst Basque
Yeah,
people,
they have the highest concentration of RH-negative blood in the world is the Basque, right?
which
But you miscarry. So, like, basically before, like, the 1950s or whatever, before they got the Rogam shot, you had to get a blood test to see if you were positive or negative. You couldn't positive negative. Like, we couldn't get married back then for multiple reasons. That's why.
Multiple. Yeah, so no one could hear what it just said. My wife, who is she is like black and Indian, said, yes, if it was back in the day, we would not have been able to get married for multiple reasons.
one of which is that I guess one of you's RH-negative.
One of which is that our blood would have been actually incompatible for like child production, which is why it's with modern technology that you have, say, like Rogam shots and things that are able to suppress the antibodies that would have actually killed the child trying to develop.
And
it.
also,
Okay.
what it suggests is that if you got, like, for example, if the Basque people specifically are heavily RH-negative, it would suggest that that is something that was common amongst Paleo-Europeans.
Also, really quickly, and Gabby, tell me if this is wrong or not, but this is what I just learned from Google. It specifically is talking about whether or not the D antigen protein is present, and that specifically is relevant to the D antigen is a large transmembrane protein coded for by the RHD gene on chromosome 1. It is highly immunogenic, meaning it can trigger a strong immune response if a D negative person is exposed to it. So,
So I had a ton of miscarriages because he had positive, I had negative.
okay.
Half the fetus.
Before our
Got it.
child, we had 7 miscarriages.
Oh my God.
And that was due to the fact that because you were positive, it would attack her cells. Got it.
Yeah.
I feel like this was important information because to know that this is an actual medical thing.
Well, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah. But like in terms of I have to get down all the way to the bottom of something to understand it. That's my weird little tism. So.
But I want to go back to the quote he gives from Connor McDerry's book, which I will remind you, McDerry held no relevant degrees.
His name is not actually...
Yeah, this is a
No,
pen
it's
name,
John
right?
Heron.
Why he just chose this to sound more Irish, to
Yes.
be more,
Literally to sound more Irish.
yeah, incredible.
It was the idea held by the leaders of the Roman Church and state. They were practically one. That's not true. Especially not in the West. In the East, a little bit more of an argument for that. In the West, however, they were definitively not the same thing and were often at odds. That all power should be centralized in the head of the church, who was also emperor of the state.
Again,
Funny
that is
thing,
not fucking
they
true.
literally had an empire that was the Holy Roman Empire that was constantly fighting with the Pope. So, and any and all religious institutions which in any way conflicted with this ideal were to be done away with. For this reason, the mystery cults were suppressed and initiation into the ancient or esoteric mysteries were forbidden so that no religious establishment, worship, or practice would exist which would draw or hold men to it other than the Roman state church. I want to bring us back to something really quick. He said that the Catholic Church and the Freemasons were working together. This directly contradicts that claim.
Tell us why.
Because
No
Freemasonry
religious-
is banned by the Catholic Church. What is Freemasonry? It's a mystery cult, according to the Catholic Church. Now, of course, everything he said here is wrong, except for the fact that, initiation into like the druidic orders was suppressed by the Catholic Church.
Literally, the only thing you can make an argument for is, yes, the Roman Catholic Church did not want other religions to exist.
Yeah, so
Really visualize the modern day Irish people. For sure, many from Ireland with Rh negative bloodlines are connected to this, but what we're really discussing is the ancient land of Ireland and her peoples. Interestingly, this is where Atlantis connects. Remember, I'm explaining this to a Charlie-like mind, so that immediately sends alarm bells ringing when I say
Charlie-like mind.
what we're discussing is the progression of civilization. We are told of an east to west movement of civilization. That advanced societies began to rise in Samaria, Mesopotamia, and Egypt 5,000 years ago, and in
this is my favorite part by far.
Yeah, this is where
Why?
But with Tartaria, we're discussing how civilization progressed from west to east, meaning from Atlantis. Here's a quote.
From Atlantis! From Atlantis!
We're not even at the craziest part yet.
Yep.
Also, I was in a weirdly good position to talk about this because I've studied so much about Native Americans, and like we don't have any real history for them. We do have archaeology, but that only gets us back so far.
It's mostly oral traditions.
No, what we do have is linguistics.
Yeah.
Because we have certain Native American language groups that tell us these people originated from the same place. And we can identify sort of, how they moved around based on what language group they belong to. So, for example, the Aztecs and the Ute peoples are related. Even though they're...
Is the location of the Ute is?
Like Utah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so like northern Utah and Colorado. So the Ute are up there. The Aztecs are down here. There's a bunch of other people between them. What does that tell us? Well, between the oral tradition of the Aztecs, the oral tradition of the Ute, and the fact that these two linguist groups that are related are separated, it tells us that the Aztecs moved south. We also have the Dene peoples. We have northern Dene. That's up in northwestern Canada. And then we have the Pacific Coast Athabascan, which are also a Dene people. And then we have the southern Dene. Do you know who they would be?
No.
The Navajo and the Apache, who have a migration story about how they came south. And we have stories from the northern Dene about how a group of people disappeared a while ago. So linguistics is a very helpful tool when you lack written history and a solid archaeological
You
record.
got to drop the Mississippian culture one too.
Which thing about them?
Specifically the migration based off of language patterns that you've kind of pieced together.
Oh, yeah. So Iroquois. Iroquoian is considered its own language group, but there is a hypothesized connection between Iroquoian and Siouan.
Now, the Iroquois and the Sioux were where and where?
The Iroquois were initially contacted in New York, and the Sioux obviously are like North Dakota.
Yep.
So we have these interesting stories amongst the Iroquois, and for the longest time, it's been believed that the Iroquois originated in Canada, and they're this weird little language isolate pocket surrounded by the Algonquians. But the Iroquois, if we just, bother to listen to the people who are telling us their story, they tell us that they had a great migration from the Big River. What do you think the Big River might be?
The Mississippi.
Yes. So they have a story about migrating east from the Big River. Now, we have another interesting thing. Do you know what the other Iroquoian tribes are?
Wait, nope.
There's the Haudenosaunee,
Yeah.
the 5 nations. And eventually the 6 nations, which includes the Tuscarora. The Tuscarora, however, are down in the Carolinas. And the Cherokee are in the Carolinas. And they are Iroquoian speakers. And for a very long time, it was believed that, so the Iroquois developed north of the St. Lawrence. They moved down below the St. Lawrence into New York. And then a splinter group goes down and becomes the Cherokee and the Tuscarora. But there's no Cherokee stories about coming south from the north. There are Cherokee stories about coming east from the west. Which means that what probably happened is there was a Proto-Iroquoian group along the Mississippi, probably around Kansas and Nebraska. One group moved east along, I forget which river is down there, maybe the Chattanooga?
Hang on.
Whatever river goes east from like Memphis. And then the other group would have followed the Ohio and gone north to the Monongahela and the Allegheny, and then gone north into New York, which is why we have no evidence of the Iroquois being there before around 1400. And guess what also happened around 1400?
Around exactly 14. This is the whole point with the mound builders.
The collapse of the Mississippian civilization. So we have a group of people who speak a language that seems pretty similar to one of the Mississippian languages show up around the time the Mississippian culture collapsed in a completely different place. And then we have another group that speaks a similar language show up south of them. Suggesting that the Iroquois are a group that left the Mississippian territories. And that's the other thing is, okay, so that's a pocket that shows up amongst the Algonquians. That means they were probably here first. So the Algonquian, their history only goes back, they talk about moving west. As far as they're concerned, they started on the East Coast, which means that they've been there so long, they've forgotten about how they got there. Potentially, they've been there since before the last ice age.
And now this has the Irish in Atlantis.
Yeah, so that's, going back to this, I wanted to explain how we use linguistics to trace people. When you don't have written history, when you don't have an archaeological record, you can use linguistics.
That's also an important thing. But you have to say on this here, it's an important thing is to try and get the language right.
Yes.
Because in this case, it's drawing comparisons and conclusion for things that are not right at all.
Sometimes, yeah. But that's the thing about linguistics is it's referred to in the same terminology as genetics. Mm-hmm. Because language families operate in a similar way to ethnic groups.
Yeah.
And they're often very closely tied to it up until you get to a point where there's mass, I don't know what the right word here is, but
conglomeration of
different cultures. Which is why up until the fall of Rome, you can really kind of paint like vast groups as being Germanic, Celtic, Italic, Greek. It's only once you get Greek being a lingua franca that Greek speaker no longer means Greek person.
Yeah, the more metropolitan things become, the more difficult it is to trace.
Yeah, so here we go.
From west to east, meaning from Atlantis. Here's a quote from Donnelly. I'm not going to read it all. But yes, this is proof that people have been talking about what I just told you for over 200 years.
This is proof. I looked this guy up. He was an American statesman in the 1800s.
Yep. Not a historian either.
No, he was a statesman and he was dismissed immediately.
Celtic tongue shows that it's separated from the Sanskrit original tongue later than the others, and that is more closely allied to the Latin than any other Aryan tongue.
Oh, let's let it...
And no, that doesn't mean that all the claims are true, but it does mean I'm not just pulling this out of nowhere. There is a foundation to all of these thoughts, some of which are too extensive to explain.
So let's go back to...
It would be too much to explain. Yeah, that seems to have said a lot.
So this is, again, Donnelly is writing in the 1860s. This is the infancy of linguistics. From all of these facts, it appeared that the population of Ireland came from the West and not from Asia. Keep in mind, the population of Ireland actually came from Iberia. And we know this through both linguistics, genetics, and archaeology. That it was... Oh, also, written history, because Nennius talks about this, and so does the Levergonal and Erin. Anyway, that it was one of the many waves of population flowing out from the island of Atlantis, and herein we find the explanation of that problem which has puzzled the Aryan scholars, Aryan here meaning European. As Ireland is farther from the Punjab than Persia, Greece, Rome, or Scandinavia, it would follow that the Celtic wave of migration must have been the earliest sent out from the Sanskrit center. But it is now asserted by Professor Schleicher and others that the Celtic tongue shows that it separated from the Sanskrit original tongue later than the others, and that it is more closely allied to the Latin than any other Aryan tongue, which isn't true. This is entirely inexplicable upon any theory of an Eastern origin of the Indo-European races, but very easily understood if we recognize the Aryan and Celtic migrations as going on about the same time from the Atlantean fountainhead. Now, what's the problem here, Stephen? Where does Indo-European actually come from?
If you were looking at
Tartaria. It literally comes from Tartaria.
The region, the same thing, because it's not.
Indo-European comes from the Caspian steppe. From
the very region that they're saying that the ancient empire rose out of in the first place, which means that one of two things.
This can't be part of the Tartaria conspiracy.
It's not.
It's just another one that's wrapped up in it?
Yeah, we're just on it. We're mixing and matching. We're throwing things together.
The absolute irony of that is so profound. I don't even think I have the words to describe
so the way I explained this very directly in my coverage of it is that Donnelly was just wrong about Sanskrit being the original Indo-European language, and that in fact Indo-European languages, as we now know, developed on the Caspian steppe, and then one group moved south, Indo, while another group moved west, European. So it wasn't that Irish originated in the east alongside Sanskrit. It was that both Sanskrit and Celtic originated in the same place.
And then diverged.
Somehow this escaped them.
That people have been talking about what I just told you for over 200 years. And no, that doesn't mean that all the claims are true. But it does mean I'm not just pulling this out of nowhere.
Wait, what did that
There
one
is
say?
a foundation to all of these thoughts, some of which are too extensive to explain.
I must confess that over 30 years ago, I stumbled rather deliberately walked into a recognition that the history of remote days as passed down was based on false premises in regards to the most famous ancient peoples, both in regards to geography and chronology, from The Riddle of Prehistoric Britain by William Culmus Beaumont.
Sorry, I just popped into my head like.
But about what? Like literally, you
Steven.
have a quote of this up, but with
I know.
context of what it is actually.
Well, the
addressing.
context is that people have been thinking this before him, so this is not his thought. He's just repeating things. But it just occurred to me that my loneliness is killing me. I must confess, I still believe that over 30 years ago, I stumbled upon or deliberately walked into a recognition that the history of remote days.
All of these thoughts, some of which are too extensive to explain in this short video. The point is, after the deluge, or the flood, there were survivors who landed in Ireland and reestablished civilization.
Aiden, who was one of the survivors
of
the flood in Ireland, who survived the flood in Ireland.
Finton.
It's our buddy Finton! Finton the man salmon!
Yes!
Finton the 5,500-year-old Irish man salmon.
Finton is the true leader of Tartaria.
I'm lost.
You should be.
Now let's get the whole Aryan thing out of the way, because many are automatically programmed to see that word in a certain light.
Programmed.
I don't know, man. Maybe the reason your videos have limited reach is because you just threw up Nazi propaganda on the screen. Did you consider that?
I had multiple videos taken down for the exact same reason.
He's like, I just don't understand why YouTube isn't showing my videos to people. And it's like, fucking Erika might as well be playing at the moment right now.
Many are automatically programmed to see that word in a certain light. These people were multicultural, and we know this because
That's not a really good way of explaining that, but it's technically not wrong.
Aryan did not refer to race. In Sanskrit, it referred to one of honor, a wise man. This gets into the ancient history of Ireland.
I love how he keeps going back to Sanskrit when it's definitively not the oldest Indo-European language or the origin of the family.
Gets into the ancient history of Ireland, with the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fomorians, who after a time of cataclysm had to settle and begin setting up new kingdoms. Now, there is proof to show this, but again, history is so mixed up because the people who set it into motion swapped locations, names.
Wait. The struggle between Rome and Ire, referring to Ireland, obviously. Council of the Church was called by the Roman Emperor Constantine into
Oh, wait. No, the Roman Emperor Constantine.
yes, in the year 325 of our era, known in history as the Council of Nicaea.
He also doesn't tell us what this is from.
Those men knew what the Great Pyramid represented and that it was associated with, and our belief was that it was their purpose to destroy it, as they did so many of the great temples and monuments of the earlier church. They did not want to leave standing so much visible evidence of the existence of the former religious institutions, which is
why they turned all those old temples into churches rather than demolishing them.
Who's even writing this? This is just a wall of text.
I think this is MacDerry.
I'm trying to figure out if...
So in every age since, the leaders of the Roman Church have had a conscious knowledge of the part played by their organization in the suppression of all knowledge concerning the history of the Great Pyramid, which, let's recall, by the time of Cleopatra, was older to her than Cleopatra is to us.
This is a passage from Irish Wisdom Preserved in Bible and Pyramids by Conor McDerry.
Yep.
Of course, you should have realized with Ireland and pyramid being mentioned in the same sentence.
Yeah. The Great Pyramid, the purpose for which it was built, and who the builders were. Those astute political priests knew that silence on such matters was the most efficacious way to have them forgotten, and by absorbing the older church and papacy, in a few generations there would be none left among the people who would know anything about such matters, because writing doesn't exist.
It also brings up again the question of why?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Therefore, the clerical writers have left us an account that is full of falsehood and invention, such as the invasion of the Vandals in Europe, in order to account for the destruction of churches and monasteries.
Whoa. Are they saying that the Vandal invasions, like from the varying different tribes for the fall of Rome, that it didn't happen? Is that actually part of it? That the Western migrations did not take place? What? The Vandals, the Goths, the Ostrogoths?
No. You gotta finish. We believe that this destruction was carried out by the organized Vandals of the new church, worked up into a state of fanatical zeal by the clergy. This is actually a much simpler issue. MacDerry doesn't understand that Vandal, the modern term, is not the ancient term Vandal.
Yeah, he thinks that the adjective...
Vandal just means destroyer, not that it actually is applied to the specific cultural ethnic group of people.
Yes, that it's an adjective, not a noun.
Driven out by the Huns.
Yeah, the term Vandal is based upon the actions of the Vandals, not the other way around.
The adjective comes from the noun.
Yeah. Also, the Vandals converted to Christianity before they got to Spain.
I realized from the time we started this, we've only covered 10 minutes now from this. We have to go through.
I know.
History is so mixed up because the people who set it into motion swapped locations, names, and dates to make it even more confusing. For example, the Phoenicians. This is another subject of Tartaria that we bring up a lot because it also causes a lot of confusion, but it was designed that way. The Phoenicians are the later Canaanites, but they are also the first civilization.
That was actually true. The Phoenicians are in fact the descendants of the Canaanites.
Yeah.
This rest part won't be.
Credited to creating an alphabet, mathematics, and advanced sea navigation. While many researchers have shown the connections between the ancient Phoenicians and the Celts, including the similarity.
So now he's connecting the Hebrew language with the affinity between the Hebrew language and Celtic. So who is this? Thomas Stratton, MD, so a doctor out of Edinburgh.
Medicine. Doctor of medicine.
Yep. In the year what?
1872.
There we go.
Which, mind you, I have to say this here right now, the 1860s, 70s,
There was
80s,
definitely
90s,
an Irish resurgence movement.
Not only was there an Irish resurgence that was trying to draw things in, but this is also, it is over the course of the 1880s going into the very early 1900s that you see the rise of proto-fascist movements, you could say, and a lot more of like race consciousness. This is esoteric zoology.
Also,
the beginning of a lot of really interesting, very racist beliefs that tie back to like ancient origins.
Wasn't Hebrew a dead language at this point?
It was kept forth by like Jews in Eastern Europe primarily. So a lot of the ones in Russia and others, that's where a lot of the Hebrew knowledge was still kept.
Gotcha.
Languages. Mainstream history will say that this is because the Phoenicians settled in Ireland and that the Celts came from their culture. But the difference in art...
Hang on, let's go back.
Mainstream history will say that this is because the Phoenicians settled in Ireland and that the Celts came from their culture.
One more time.
Who says it?
One more time.
Mainstream history will say that this is because the Phoenicians settled in Ireland and that the Celts came from their culture.
Ancient
Nobody
history will say,
says
no
that.
one
No, mainstream history, he said.
Oh.
Nobody says that.
What?
Also, I went through all of these. None of them are correct. Ur is not the word for... Okay, first of all, fresh, new earth, the sun, a man, and heath are not synonymous. There is no word that means all of those things in either of these languages, nor does Ur mean any of those things in Irish. And I'm pretty sure the only thing it means, I think in Hebrew it might mean land.
And that the Celts came from their culture. But the difference in art, culture, and oral legend in Ireland is unlike any other in the world, and some of the first megalithic structures were created in Ireland with astrological associations.
Long before the Gaels got there.
Associations thousands of years before the pyramids. As presented in Irish wisdom and
Thousands of years before the pyramid. No, if they said 5,000 years ago, then that would have been around the same time.
Around the same time as the pyramids, yeah.
Not thousands of years. That's literally that's around the same time.
Also, it's important to note that Newgrange didn't look like that in 3200 BC. Like Stonehenge didn't look the way it does now when it was built. They added on to it later.
astrological associations thousands of years before the pyramids. As presented in Irish wisdom and Bible and pyramids, the story is actually in reverse. The Phoenicians are the later Hebrews. Those are the Utri, or the corrupted version of the original spirituality. This is what we refer to as the Phoenician hijack. The process in which the old church, the Church of Iessa, or the early Phoenician or Phoenician Celtic Ibernian priesthood, was destroyed, plagiarized, and then renamed, suppressed from history. These peoples were then hijacked and became the later Phoenicians, otherwise known as the Canaanites. They became the new church. This is the Holy Roman Empire. The proof is in the language.
This is the Holy Roman Empire. Wait, did he just say this is the Holy Roman Empire?
Well, obviously
Also,
the Canaanites and the Holy Roman
said
Empire
from the
existed at the same time.
he said that the Phoenicians were the original Hebrews. Is that what he said?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you need to understand that Phoenician actually was Phoenician, as in Finn, the Irish word, which means the sun, but doesn't, because that's not what Finn has ever meant in Irish in any iteration ever. Also, of course, what are we getting from this? What is the source here? It's Connor McDerry, a man who cited no sources, had no credentials, and objectively got things wrong. Constantly.
Histories and the forgeries that are within the Bible, as presented by Connor McDerry. The facts presented in that book are undeniable and seen clearly with anyone who has a basic understanding of Irish history.
What do you mean undeniable? What do you mean undeniable?
Basic understanding of Irish history. Anybody who has a basic understanding of Irish history knows these are undeniable.
It's that's not even circular reasoning. It's not even circular.
It's not even reasoning.
Nope.
It's circular assertion.
Atlantis. The survivors landed in ancient Ireland.
Here we go.
This civilization began to mingle with a variety of other cultures, producing similar legends, traditions, and sciences that were spread across the world. They then made their way to the east and into the Indus Valley. Then the start of Mesopotamian cultures were...
What's the problem here?
Ireland doesn't have a tradition of Atlantis. Mm-hmm. That doesn't exist.
Nope. That's not even what the Lever Gadal and Aaron says. That it says they came from Spain. It says they came from Greece at one point too.
Sciences that were spread across the world. They then made their way to the east and into the Indus Valley. Then the start of Mesopotamian cultures or Arya cultures.
Hold on. Oh, no. They just then made their way east? Like they started off in Ireland and they just made their way east to get there?
Yep.
Yeah. What's the problem with that?
But then it ignores literally any other language group that would have developed out of the exact area.
Uh-huh.
The start of Mesopotamian cultures or Arya cultures such as Sumeria or Ardia, and then this continued into Tartaria or Asia. Essentially, in our research, we connect the Tartarians to the ancient Scythians. This is referenced by several 18th century historians, and the Scythians were the Celts who had traveled east. But again,
You want
They were not.
Literally the other way around.
It was literally the other way. They were the steppe nomadic people.
And you can trace this back through
Came
linguistics.
West.
That's the irony. The entire thing here is built upon one guy's faulty understanding of Irish etymology. All of this is wiped out by the fact that Irish didn't come from Sanskrit.
The wild bottleneck here of history to one man who wrote a book is nuts.
It's insane.
and the Scythians were the Celts who had traveled east. But again, they tell us the story in reverse. The term Tartar is actually a Gaelic term that is associated with the story of an Irish soldier far out east catching a Tartar, a thief. The reason we bring up Ireland is because there are many...
Hang on, pause.
I found this exact dictionary You know what the word right above Tartar is? Tattoo. Which means this dictionary has to date from at least 1700 AD.
Tell them why.
Because tattoo was not a word that entered the English language until like 1700.
Why is that?
Because it was a word that was, I think, indigenous to the Polynesians.
Wasn't it also used to describe the drum beat rather than stick marking?
Yeah, I think so. It could be, yes. I think the two were related. Because the tattooing was done by using a hammer and a chisel. So, like, would be a tattoo drum beat, which would be the same. Yeah, so the funny part here is if you actually read this, the reason that Tartar means thief is because they were referring to the Tartars, as in the Mongolians.
The raiders that would come and extract wealth and burn things to the ground. Regular raiding parties would go into Kievan Rus and harass villages.
In some Eastern battle, here's the funny thing is like he's so focused on proving his conclusion that he's missing the fact that all of the context explains the things he thinks are holes.
The story of an Irish soldier far out east catching a Tartar, a thief. The reason we bring up Ireland is because there are many researchers who have covered the suppressed history of the ancient Celts and Druids. The Druids were literally the main enemy of the Roman Empire. They were
No, they were not. They were not the main enemy. They literally were not the main enemy. You mean the main enemy?
Oh, here. Well, let's focus on something. He's talking about Ireland. A history of Druidism in Britain. The Romans never fought in Ireland. They may not have even...
They did. They did invade Ireland a couple times. They never got far or did anything.
I know they landed a couple of times.
Yeah, so they had minor invasions that were basically not exactly raiding, but were pretty much suppressive forces in the same way that they would launch expeditions in Germania.
I'm not sure they ever even landed.
Yeah, they did. They did. Like, literally. They
check on that?
Yeah. I just swear to God. Roman invasion of Ireland. There are reports of Agricola, the governor of Britain, considering an invasion in the 1st century. Oh, wait, they didn't authorize an invasion, but there was evidence that suggested trade and cultural exchange existed between the Roman military, but no Roman military occupation ever occurred. I swear there was something that they would launch punitive raids against raiders from Ireland.
They may have, but again, different from an invasion.
Yeah, fair, true.
Yeah. So they never invaded Ireland. Also, to say the Druids were the main enemy of the Roman Empire, the Celts were for a long time in the Northwest. That didn't make them the main enemy, but it was the main enemy there. But the thing is, Druid wasn't a culture.
I also thought the Gauls were a much bigger problem.
The Gauls were Celts.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Gauls were the problem, but Druidism was just it's even improper to call Druidism the religion of the Celts, because a Druid was anything from a priest to a doctor.
Wasn't it a class?
It was a class of Celtic civilization that sat, I think, right below the ruler.
Yeah.
So you'd have your king, you would have your druids, you would have your warriors, you would have your artisans, you would have your landed peasants, and then you would have your slaves. So druids were a class. They were basically the professional class. It would be kind of like saying, the primary enemy of the United States was the lawyers.
I agree with that statement.
Okay, fair. Maybe I should pick a better term. The primary enemy of the United States was the doctors.
I agree with that statement.
Or what about
RFK?
All right, wait. What about the primary enemy of France was the Smiths?
No, because Smiths would have been considered the artisan class.
So then, I don't know, the lords?
No, that
would have been the ruler class.
No,
Yeah.
see, if you want it to be realistic from this, it's the primary enemy of Cambodia was the doctors, because it was. They did kill
there we
them.
go.
They did
Okay.
kill them.
Yeah. Like how the primary enemy of communism is not shooting itself in the foot. Food.
No, it's actually...
Communists really cannot figure out farming, and I think that's very funny.
No, it's not the farming. It's they can't figure out distribution.
No, it's also the farming, because when the Russians, when Russia became communist, they were like, hey guys, it's not cool that some of you have more land than others, even if that derives from the fact that you're better at farming than the other people. So those of you who are good at farming, you go to Gulag, and we give your land to person who do not know how to farm.
They're
which caused
also,
a famine.
at the same time that was happening, there was a pseudoscientist that really got Stalin's favor that believed he had communist science was a thing, that they believed that communism could be applied to biology, it could be applied to agriculture, it could be applied to everything, basically. Like,
Because all biology is class
it
warfare.
was true communist science.
Of
So
course.
they believed that as part of this science that plants of the same class would not compete with one another. So by using close seeding, you could actually plant wheat and other things much closer together.
Keep in mind,
And it would actually grow better. So you could double, triple, or quadruple your output per acre. And they did this, which in turn caused the plants to choke off each other and die, thus creating a food crisis.
keep in mind, barley, wheat, rye all grow better in different kinds of soils.
Yes. Also,
And you're also stripping the nutrients from the soil.
yes, you also need certain amounts of nutrients and certain levels of nutrient compensation and consumption of the plants.
And then, of course, other places where communism has been applied to farming, like in China, where they were like, hey, you know what we should get rid of is all of these pests, except they forgot to get rid of the locusts.
They got rid of the birds that eat the locusts.
Oh my
And then
god.
the locusts got rid of the food that the people eat, and 20 million people starved to death.
I'm realizing this here now as well. We are 52 minutes in on
Yep.
this, which if you add from the previous one, it means that we just did this again.
Yeah, what are we going to do for the Patreon segment for History Unhinged for this?
I have no idea. We're going to do shots.
Are we going to have one? Is this episode not going to have a Patreon segment?
No.
Ireland is because there are many
So I gotta
researchers who
pee
have
so
covered
bad.
the suppressed history of the ancient Celts and Druids. The
Wait.
Druids were literally the main enemy of the Roman Empire. They were described as savages and barbaric, yet the history that we receive on them come from the Roman historian Josephus himself.
First of all, Josephus was Judean and never left Judea. So it does, and by that point, Gaul and the Celtic territories had been tamed for a century. Also, why would you cite Josephus instead of Caesar or Agricola or anyone who wrote about the Celts while encountering them during the time their culture actually was dominant? Why would you do that?
Convenience. To ignore it.
Himself. So, after Atlantis, the Church of Iesa was established in Ireland and expanded all the way to the Bering Strait, where they actually crossed over and established
Remember, not a single historical mention of this ever.
colonies on the northwest of America as depicted on old maps.
Oh, that one drove me nuts. I spent an hour trying to translate it.
Where they actually crossed over and established
Where is it?
colonies on the northwest
There we go. So, right? Oh, look. It says Tartaria right there. See? Tartari? See?
Uh-huh.
See right there?
I see it.
Monte Urbano. This is an Italian map. So here's the problem. And I know for a fact that he did not go into nearly as much effort as I did trying to translate this. That roughly translates to, in this place they live in the mode of the Tartars.
Modo de Tatar. So they live as nomads.
Yep. And what do we know about Native Americans of the Dene culture and the Inuit cultures? They were semi-nomadic, just like the Tartars. So this means one of two things. Either the Tartars set up colonies, or the people who lived there lived like
Moved
Tartars.
around.
There's also the fact that this map is hilariously inaccurate.
Oh dear God.
Yeah.
west of America as depicted on old maps. The map that you're looking at is the Monte map.
It's also not called the Monte map. It's the 1587 map by Monte Urbano.
There's some really interesting things on this map, but you can see that there are 3 massive cities in Florida during this time and also elsewhere throughout the U.S. that
Keep in mind-
really shouldn't be on this map. There are also maps that show massive amounts of architecture all
1587.
over Asia and Africa that are no longer
The
there.
French landed in Spain, in New Spain when?
Hold
Or
on,
not
hold on.
the French. The Spanish landed in New Spain when?
So
When did they land in Mexico? 1515?
well, hold on. No, 1550 was heading down into South America, if I recall. No, that was. The
Is that supposed to be
1530s.
Baja
I think it
California,
was.
or is that supposed to be
Yes,
the lake
that's
that was
Baja
in California?
California.
Okay, so Baja California goes up to Canada.
It's not the most accurate map. Also, Florida is a nub. Florida is a chode on this map.
Florida Man uncut. Or
Also,
No, that's Florida man eunuched.
also Cuba is huge.
Oh, yeah, giant.
Cuba is the size of a squished Texas in
Long
this.
Island doesn't exist, and the Chesapeake is a slight divot.
Wait, is that supposed to be Haiti and the Dominican Republic?
I believe so.
That's the size of
Also,
New York.
These are the Great Lakes.
Yeah, one is in Maine, one is in Montana, the other one is in the middle of
Here's
Alberta.
Colorado. Oh, yeah. No, yeah.
Oh, the Mississippi doesn't exist.
No. Well, it does. It's just over here.
Goes from
Out of
Baja.
Baja, California?
I guess so.
They didn't have satellites back then.
Well, no, it's probably one of these little guys right here. Anyway, 1587, right?
Yep.
There's some really interesting things on this map, but you can see that there are 3 massive cities in Florida during this time and also elsewhere throughout the US that really shouldn't be on this map.
But the Spanish had already settled in Florida.
Also, in no way does it say they're massive.
Hang on.
It just
No,
says they're there.
It just exists as settlements. That could be like literally 500 people.
Could be forts.
I'm really starting to think this is just a big bit that got out of hand. Because, like, you can't tell me you're going to look at this map and consider any part of it, like, even remotely accurate for any version of scale or location. Right?
Yeah.
He's not bright.
It's got to be willful, though, right?
Massive amounts of architecture all over Asia and Africa.
Oh, it's definitely willful.
Because, massive amounts of architecture all over Asia and Africa. It's not that, like, maybe people were just drawing what they knew cities looked like to imply there's a city there. No, these guys traveled to each of these cities and depicted them as they were, clearly.
Is he going to tell me, hang on, is he going to say that the depictions of large sea monsters on maps to depict the danger of the sea is actually representative of real sea monsters that
I don't
existed?
think he addresses it.
No,
Okay.
those were Tartarian seahorses.
Oh, you're so right.
There we go.
They're the ones that pulled Atlantis.
Yes.
Here we go.
Into the sea.
Now, over time, many different nations and cultures were formed. It wasn't just the Irish, and each of these colonies were allowed to start up their own nations. What was originally a system of spiritual allegory with the intention of creating humans with a sense of morality, with a pursuit
No,
of virtue.
how do you know this? It says, oh, it was started with the specific intention of doing this. What do you mean? How would you know this if there are no actual writings that depict... What do you mean? He is deriving intent from what? Mm-hmm. From what?
Well, you have to understand, you need to watch his 6-hour video on this to understand each individual topic.
began to become abused by certain states, and this led to the creation of religion. The confusing part is that we have been fed false timelines since our birth. For example, Rome. Just as we mentioned some inconsistencies with Pompeii, there are many more to consider. One of the most popular points to bring up in the Tartaria community is the works of Flamenco. He's a scholar who has written on the subject of false chronologies and presents the idea that Rome may have added 1,000 years to the timeline.
Oh no, this is the time conspiracy.
And I feel like at this point, considering the amount of time that has passed in us trying to record this episode,
Oh my God.
which has now spanned 2 channels, it only makes sense that it spans a 3rd. So if you want to catch us covering the phantom time hypothesis and Anatoly Fomenko's new chronology, you can catch that over on the History Unhinged Patreon. Otherwise, I will leave you with this. No.
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 Care to elaborate?
No.
We'll see you on Patreon.